Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and fellow Masons, it is with great honor and enthusiasm that I welcome you to the Chancellor Robert R. Livingston Masonic Library Series of Grand Lodge. This esteemed institution, steeped in the rich traditions of Freemasonry, have been a beacon of knowledge, enlightenment, and fraternity for nearly 175 years. Tonight, we gather in the spirit of curiosity and enlightenment to partake in an engaging lecture that promises to broaden our horizons. Tonight, we have with us some members of the trustees of the library. We have Right Worshipful Larry Wolf. Larry, raise your hand. And Right Worshipful, the secretary of our trustees is Right Worshipful Jim Mellis. Say hello. And also we have in our staff, we have the director of collection services. We have Alexander Vastola. And our museum technician, we have Raderick Osiri. And I, of course, your host, Michael Larocco. I'm the executive director. So the museum has over 40,000 artifacts, even though the website still says 37,000. We have over 60,000 books right behind the stacks to your left. And we also have a digital content on an app called Odillo that you can watch on your phone, tablet, or on a computer. We do genealogy search for any Masonic Mason of New York. And also we have the entire collection of the American Lodge of Research and the Ars Quarto Coronatum, the international one. We have all the lodge's founding documents, which are their original petitions and dispensations. And please support the library by buying a lapel pin, a shirt, a hat, and we're getting new coins shortly. The Livingston Library would like to thank the Square Club of the 4th Manhattan District of Manhattan for sponsoring these lectures, and the Friends of the Library, our luscious supporters, some of them are here tonight. And finally, our live lectures. Past lectures can be viewed on a YouTube channel, and next month we'll be having Oscar Allen doing Mark My Word, Building a New City, a lesser-known intriguing story of Masonic links to the establishment of the first city in the USA after the Revolution War for Independence. And so tonight's lecture is called The Spiritual in Art, Hilma F. Klint, presented by Milosz Jeziorski, a multidisciplinary artist and creator of the podcast Creative Codex, where he crafts sonic portraits of history, great creative minds. He holds a master's in film scoring from NYU and won Best Original Score at VisionFest for Ontologica. Behind Matter, the work of Hilma F. Klint. What is the spiritual message of Hilma's paintings for the Temple series? What esoteric traditions inspired Hilma F. Klint? And how do we understand the intersection between spirituality and art? That is the ambitious purpose of this presentation. Please help me welcome Milosz Jeziorski.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody. Good evening, good evening. So I'm gonna just skip the preamble and we're gonna get right to it because there's really so much to talk about Hilma that we just need to get right into things. And we might still run out of time. So if let's say there was a movie about Hilma af Klint, there's a quote of hers that I feel would be incredibly appropriate to begin this movie. It's one of my favorite quotes of hers. It's one that you'll stumble upon if you look at her life, even with any cursory glance. So she wrote this in one of her notebooks. I am so small, I am so insignificant, but the force that flows through me is so powerful that I must go forward. The experiments I have undertaken will astound humanity. I mean, I just personally love this quote. It's filled with everything that you need to know in some ways. I mean, already right from the get-go, she's kind of positioning herself, acknowledging that she's an underdog in her own story. Could be as simple as just that she was, a female artist in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when predominantly male artists were in the public sphere. Could be other things. But there's also this facet where she recognizes, in a way, that she's stumbled onto something so incredibly valuable to broader humanity that that's going to become part of her life's mission, is to share this vision of hers. And it's an incredible vision, and it's one that gives her strength in a sense. But I think she also recognizes that she is a bit of an underdog, especially for her time. So if that's how her movie begins, then what would the opening scene be? I think this might be the opening scene. You can imagine yourself in the 1960s, and you're roughly in your 20s, and you have this attic in your house where there's these vast collection of crates, these big wooden crates. And you're not quite sure what's in them, but you know who they belong to. They belong to your great aunt Hilma. And you've acquired these because 20 years ago, your father, to him that was just his aunt Hilma, met her, and she asked a favor of him. She asked him if he could look after her artworks after she passed. Implicitly, he said yes. She was always very kind to him, and she even looked after you and your father when you guys came to visit. And so he takes on this project, and he brings these crates into the attic. He didn't really know the full scope of this because she wasn't incredibly successful during her lifetime. But of course, it's a family obligation now. So 20 years pass, you're about to go off to college, and you say, okay, well, now it's time to make this family obligation. It's ready for it to come to collect its dues. And so you go up with your father, and you start to open these crates. You're not sure what you're going to find. But one after another, you start to see things you've never seen before. Works of art that, even in the 1960s, would feel very modern, very fresh. Even in our age today, they still have a freshness to them. Works that are just filled with incredible colors, composition, very strong compositions. You can't say that they're derivative of anybody from certainly about 60 years ago from your time period when they were originally created in the early 1900s, 1907, like in these works. But the other impressive thing about these is, as you unroll these canvases, is just their sheer size. For example, these, in the series called the 10 Largest, are 10 feet tall by 7 feet wide. I mean, these are enormous sizes for paintings. You can imagine standing in front of one, and when you do, you're not like looking at a painting, you're just falling into these shapes and colors and these compositions of Hilma. So, okay, you're completely lost in what is this? You're unrolling these canvases. You had no idea about this work and what to think of it. But that's not all. Then you have other works, and these works just keep rolling out and continuing. These, for example, are 5 feet wide by 5 feet tall. Impressive in their own right, very mature sense of composition. Unheard of in their time period of the early 1900s. And so what do you do with this? How do you make sense of this? These numbers start to stack up. There's hundreds of artworks, one after the other. You're opening these things up, and you're just marveling at it, and this becomes a life-changing experience if you're this person. And in this case, that person that I'm talking about was an actual figure. This is Johann af Klint, Hilma's grandnephew, who ended up taking on this obligation of taking her works and making them publicly known, as per her request. Because there was one catch. There was one thing that she asked as a favor, a condition of Johann's father, which was that he wouldn't open these crates and make these works public until 20 years after she passed. He agreed to this, although you can admit that it's a rather odd request. She had other ideas and plans in mind. And so, okay, we have these works. I mean, mind-blowing on their own, hundreds and hundreds of them pile up. But then we also have notebooks, 124 individual notebooks, totaling 26,000 pages of handwritten and typed text filled with passages like this one. My mission, if it succeeds, is of great significance to humankind, for I am able to describe the path of the soul from the beginning of life to its end. And you're rifling through these books and seeing diagrams and notes and just, what do you do with this stuff? It really starts to hit you with the effect of that this is somebody trying to like dissect the fabric of matter itself. This one both of these actually are from that recent exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art of Hilma's that was in New York City called What Stands Behind the Flowers. Did anybody see that one? Anybody go to that one? Have a chance? Oh, it's wonderful. There's a book of it now you can check out too. It's full of these kinds of images where she studied flowers and plants. And basically then she creates these little squares that explain some kind of hidden spiritual property of that specific plant or flower. And just again, has hundreds of these kinds of illustrations. So this is an example of some of her notebooks, specifically one in which she was trying to catalog some terms that we'll be talking about later. But I want you to notice that symbol, plus X. So in this one condition she asked of Johann's father, she said that, okay, if you agree to this, you'll notice that once you do open them, that the notebooks and the paintings are marked with this symbol plus X. And those are the ones that you should withhold for the 20 years. So that's a very important symbol to her for that reason. Though it doesn't appear in the paintings. It's specifically to just works that were supposed to be held for a later time. So once again, by Johann's count, I spoke with him about a month ago. He's in his 80s now. God bless him. He says that they counted up 1,500 individual artworks, 124 notebooks, counting up 26,000 written pages. And in addition to that, in the crates were also personal religious items, some of which we'll cover in a little bit, and photographs, personal photographs of Hilma and people that she knew and her friends in her circle. So that's where we find ourselves. Now, as far as I see it, there are three great mysteries about both Hilma af Klint and her work, and I think we'll have time, we'll cover all three of these today, and hopefully give satisfactory answers. So number one, who or what was Hilma speaking to in her channeling sessions? As we'll come to learn, that becomes a very important part of her process. Number two, did Hilma belong to an esoteric society, specifically a Rosicrucian order? And number three, what is the spiritual message to humanity encoded in her paintings? So we have our work cut out for us. That's why I said we got to just get started. So before we can really tackle these, maybe what would be useful is for folks who aren't super familiar with Hilma already and haven't read the biographies, and haven't visited the galleries, I'm going to give a very quick speed run of her biography, even probably quicker than these slides, because again, there's just so much work we need to do to cover so much ground with these other questions. So the basic sense of it, if I just give you the essential details, this woman, Hilma af Klint, was born October 26th in 1862 in a place called Karlberg Palace in Solna, Sweden. This is a military barracks that she was born in because she comes from a military family. Her father was a captain, and all of her family are decorated naval officers, going back multiple generations, at least to her great-grandfather that we know of. And even her name, af Klint, it comes from that line because it didn't, the af in Swedish denotes nobility, the same way like von in German does. And the family earned that honor after her great-grandfather and grandfather participated in the Battle of Vyborg Bay, where the Swedes were able to fight off the Russian Navy. Still considered one of the great naval battles of history, apparently. Okay, so jumping ahead, we know some of that. She went to school. She was a good student, but clearly her enthusiasm from the beginning was related to the arts. And in her notebook, she later writes about her schooling. I can't remember much more than that school caused me grief. Something probably most of us can agree with. After grade school, she attended a technical school in 1879. And sidebar about this, in that time period in Sweden and elsewhere in the world, the Western world, women, or when they were girls rather, it was not expected that they would continue their education past grade school. Your family had to pay to send your girls to school for further education past basic, elementary. And so her family was decent means, middle class, upper middle class. So they thought it was important that their girls got an education. Okay, so things progress. She takes painting lessons separately from her school studies at a women's only painting workshop run by an artist called Kirsten Carden. Very fascinating woman in her own right. Then around that same time, we're talking about she's in her 20s already, she starts to participate and visit spiritualist circles where people have seances and people contact spirits and speak with the dead. Most of these are open to the public at the time. Some of them were likely private, especially once she got to know a woman named Bertha Valerius, who was an artist, photographer, and a spirit medium. She becomes a very important figure early on in influencing Hilma as a model, in a sense. Here's an artist that's also connecting with the spirit world. And I think that model early on, the fact that she had someone like that to model, I think becomes very important for her. She actually, in these crates of hers that we spoke about, is a notebook of Bertha Valerius from session notes, basically from the seances they would have. So Bertha Valerius obviously had some kind of closeness to Hilma to give her this kind of book. All right, jumping on ahead, we find that she continues her studies, goes to the Academy of Fine Arts in Stockholm, the Royal Academy of Fine Arts, where she meets her best friend, who will be her best friend for the rest of her life, Anna Castle. They both share a lot in common, including both spiritually and artistically. Around this time, tragically, the youngest sister of her siblings, Hermina, passes away. The details are sketchy. No one really knows. May have just been, an illness at that time. It was before antibiotics. Tragedies like that happened. But it's important to point out because, not only does it inform her character as an important, loss personally, but it also kind of highlights maybe some of these reasons why a movement like spiritualism became so common throughout so many countries around the world. People were losing loved ones, and they felt the grief, and they felt like they wanted to keep in touch and contact them, and it was impossible to speak with, our dearly departed. And so seances, provided some of that relief for that experience, and it's important to point out because that can be a personal motivating factor for her. Okay, jump ahead. Around April 15th, 1896, scratch that. I want to lead up to that in 1 second. So we're talking about now she's in her early 30s, and the training that she got at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts was very much classically motivated, Renaissance type of training. So if you look at some of these sketches and paintings of hers, she could, draw as well as her teachers, certainly. Some of those studies of anatomy and everything. Important to point out because there's always somebody that, might say, these people who do abstract looking art, they don't know how to actually paint or draw. But she had a very strong foundation. So what you end up seeing in her artworks later, you can assume they look exactly like she wants them to, because she has the skill to do just regular human forms with full-on Renaissance style painting. So she joins a society called the Edelweiss Society, which is specifically a spiritualist society where they gather together once a week and they have seances. But there was one issue with that. It's that it's open to the public, And so folks can just kind of barge in, strangers, and, in these oftentimes intimate moments where someone is speaking to a loved one. I don't know how comfortable people are when there's strangers in the room. So Hilma, as well as a number of other members of the Edelweiss Society, they see that as an issue, and so they form their own group. So Hilma and 4 other women from the Edelweiss Society form this group, and they call themselves De Fem in Swedish. In English, that translates to the 5. It's simply these 5 women. And they decide that they'll do these seances on their own and meet as a Bible study group, as well as a study group of theosophic texts, like Madame Blavatsky's A Secret Doctrine was commonly studied, and similar kind of things during the occultism craze in the early 1900s. Theosophical texts being a big primary one. So the 5 includes these women: Cornelia Cederberg, Sigrid Hedman, Mathilda Nielsen, Anna Castle, her best friend, and Hilma af Klint. She's the youngest of the 5. She's at 34 years old. The other women have various experience. Mathilda Nielsen and Sigrid Hedman are kind of well-known among spiritualist circles in Sweden, and they have a lot of experience with channeling, and so they kind of, at first, are the leaders very much of this group. So any questions so far? I might be going fast. Cool. Great. So, importantly, it's in the 5, in this very, very small and private circle of 5 women, that Hilma receives her training as a spirit medium. Because, if you can imagine, it's a weekly meeting, and the way it was set up is that one of the women would serve as the channeler. First, it would be the senior members in the beginning, Mathilda Nielsen or Sigrid, and they would sit, and somebody else would be designated to write down what was happening, and they would, join hands at times, and various processes of purification first, like prayer. And this is an example of one of their altars, well, the main altar, where you can imagine the 5 of them actually could probably fit at the beginning and end of their sessions. Okay. So the stated aim of the 5 was the spiritual development of the members through contact with what they called the high ones. You could say that there's some influence from theosophy with this. Madame Blavatsky would refer to like the ascended masters as a concept. But to the 5 and to Hilma, they were the high ones. But the high ones, in terms of the hierarchy, are almost like so removed from our physical plane that you speak with the spirits as a medium to them. And so the spirits weren't the high ones themselves. You'd be speaking with them, and they're receiving the messages from the high ones. There was a tool called the psychograph during spiritualism at that time. It was very common. But all that did was letters. And because most of them were actually artistically inclined in the group, they started to feel an inclination to also draw what they were seeing during these visionary states. As you can imagine, like maybe an image pops into your mind, or this is an example of one sketch. And you feel like, well, this seems important. Maybe we'll draw this out too. And so there's tons of these. There's hundreds of these kinds of sketches from these sessions, which again, they were doing privately. This wasn't about inviting people in. This wasn't about writing a book afterward and then becomes a bestseller. They were completely secluded in an ascetic sense, and they were all completely agreeable with that. If this never gets out into anybody in the public, that's fine by us. This is purely for our spiritual development. So the aims were very pure. Now, here's an example of some paintings Hilma starts to do a little later in time, but there's a lot of influence you can see that basically this group, the 5, she was in it for 10 years, and they really develop a vocabulary for these experiences. So this is a sketch from the 5. This one would have been a session where Anna was serving as the channeler, and she has this snail shape, but it's not just a snail. You see these writings around the shell. The shell seems to be dissected by these sections, and it's emerging from the top. And there's written here, Ananda, which is a fusion of one of the spirit names that they would regularly speak with, Ananda, and Anna's own name. So some kind of indication there. And then they would later study these sketches, reflect on them for interpreting what the spirits were trying to communicate. So that was 1905. And then later in 1906, Hilma starts to do a very important painting series. And this was one of the first works. So, I mean, you can't deny the influence. This is another one of the sketches from the Five from a channeling session in 1904. Not Hilma channeling in that time. I think that was Sigrid. I think her initial is the first in the initial down there, the signature. But clear sense of some kind of pyramid shape with multi-tiers, some kind of star up top emanating outward. And then many years later, 1915, Hilma paints this. So there's symbols that they're encountering in these channeling sessions that Hilma feels are so important, and maybe she also ends up experiencing them in her own channeling sessions, that they become the basis for her work, especially on this series called Paintings for the Temple, which in many ways is her most famous, and she would probably argue her most important. So we come to the question, who or what was Hilma speaking to in her channeling sessions? Well, in terms of what work the Five did, they established connection with at least these 5 spirits who they spoke to regularly, whose names were Gregor, Amaliel, Ananda, George, and Clemens. Again, these were intermediaries for what they perceived was and understood were the high ones. And after the 5 kind of disbanded, Hilma, in some fashion, kept the thread of connection with these spirits. And the communication didn't stop just because the group stopped. In April 12th, 1904, a very pivotal moment comes through the channeling session where this message is received that is channeled by Anna. So Anna channels a message from the spirit Ananda. And it says, Ananda also prays for you, Hilma. You should rest for days, quiet and still. Look toward images, old ones, images that wait for you. Just have patience, then you will be guided calmly and surely to the goal that lies before you. Initially, this kind of message was not out of the ordinary for the 5 to receive. Sometimes the spirit would call out a certain member of the group, and then they would reflect on it, and maybe it was about a personal issue they're having, and they would talk about it afterward. But in this case, Anna, who's channeling, and Hilma, who are very close, and both artistically inclined, they get very excited about this word images. Images that wait for you. Look toward images, old ones. And they run with it, and they say, well, maybe the high ones want us to start doing more with these drawings. Maybe there's an art project here, and that's supposed to be something that we would eventually share with people outside of the circle. And to that, the other 3 members, they're very kind of cautious to say that might be something the high ones would say, because so far everything has been very insular, very private. For, I think, 8 years by this point, they haven't let a single soul into their group. And they haven't been engaging in this kind of artworks. But Hilma starts to really run with this idea, and so does Anna. Later on, she writes, prophecies of the creation of astral paintings came through Ananda beginning in 1904. So confirming this entry, what was very pivotal. And so what happens from this moment? Essentially, because Hilma and Anna feel so strongly that this is the way forward, the group disbands, because Hilma's position as now a channeler grows and grows, and then she feels like this is the direction we need to go. But the other 3 members, the senior members, disagree. And it causes a serious split. And then basically right after they split, is when Hilma starts this incredible series of paintings called Paintings for the Temple. So Hilma refers to the Paintings for the Temple series as a spiritual message to mankind from higher dimensions. Now, I study creative geniuses for my show, on my podcast, and I can see by just the way these works come out for her and the rate they come out, that there's a tremendous force with this inspiration that she has, where it's kind of mind-boggling once you look at the numbers of how quickly she does these paintings. And she kind of acknowledges this in her notebooks again, where she writes things like, "The pictures were painted directly through me without any preliminary drawings and with great force. I had no idea what the paintings were supposed to depict. Nevertheless, I worked swiftly and surely without changing a single brush stroke." So for this series that she starts with, Paintings for the Temple, it's a total of 193 paintings. The creative vision of it dictates that they should be presented to humanity in a spiral temple, which culminates in an observatory. So after you've viewed everything, you arrive at the sky. Now, here's the point about the tremendous force of this inspiration. 111 of the paintings from the 193 total were finished between November 1906 and April 1908. So when I was reading that, I was like, okay, what is that? What is that? Run out to? It's one painting for every 4 days. One of these. What? Like once a month I could understand, but one for every 4 days? I mean, it's tremendous force of inspiration. That's basically on par with someone like a Vincent van Gogh, who completed 900 paintings in 10 years, similar rate. So she was possessed by something, whether it was just her own creative force and vision, or this channel being opened after 10 years of spiritual growth. Either way, both are just as exciting of a prospect. So here's another example. Hilma receives a message from the High Masters in 1907, which explains that these letters that paradoxically keep showing up in her paintings, that there's a reason for them, because they would initially, I don't know if you remember, in those sketches from the 5, they would show up in those sketches as well. But what's really fascinating, one of the mysteries also about Hilma's paintings, is that she didn't really understand these letters either. Like, she's just as much in the dark as we are. So she spent her life trying to figure it out. So this message that came from the High Masters in 1907, after the 5 had disbanded, and when she had already been in the middle of this whirlwind of force of paintings, it said, "The purpose of these letters is to prepare the way for a language of symbols that has already existed forever and that has now been given to humanity by the creative spirits." So here's an example of these letters and how Hilma would catalog these in a notebook. I hadn't heard about this, but I had found this surprisingly in a book called Notes and Methods of Hilma of Klint, which you can get. And all the way in the back of the book, after wonderful pictures and things from her notebooks, starts this, what looks like a dictionary. And I was like, what is this? I'd never heard about this. And so it's a book which Hilma titled Letters and Words Pertaining to the Works by Hilma af Klint, referring to herself in third person. But of course, with the understanding that one day someone's going to crack this book open and try to understand these works, just like she is. And so I individually counted up, turning these pages, how many of these entries, of these symbolic letters there are. And is over 800. I don't mean that there's over 800 lines. I mean, each one of these individual symbolic kind of letters with their own definition. It's just like, what is happening? That was that was her mission. And so here's an example of some of these definitions, including some of my favorite. So on the subject of the letters W and U, we find these definitions by Hilma. The letter W, which very often the W and the U do appear in her work, together. W means the body, matter, and the material plane, while the letter U means spiritual forces of life and the spiritual plane. So you often will see them in kind of this swirly script linking together as a kind of symbolic reference to the union of the spiritual and the material plane. And then there's some of my other random favorites that I stumbled on while looking through these. So there's the word or symbolic letter S-O capital H, and she defines this as a desperate, impotent struggle during the time of wheat in the service of spiritual forces. The letter word O-H-E means the bright currents of the astral forces in our world. S-E-S means yearning, humility, fear of hostile spiritual beings. My favorite, capital letters U and H mean the time between two earthly existences. It's fascinating stuff. So regarding the first question, I suppose we've kind of answered that in our own roundabout way. And now we get to this other fascinating mystery. Did Hilma belong to an esoteric society? Specifically a Rosicrucian order. Now why specifically Rosicrucians? Well, turns out there's a lot of symbolism going on in both her paintings, her notebooks, her personal life, that seems to revolve around Rosicrucianism. So the recurring symbol you see a lot in her work is the pairing of a rose and a cross. That's being the primary symbol of Rosicrucian orders. Even over here, is the circle of roses, various crosses. There's frequent mentions of Rosicrucians in her personal notebooks. Specifically, in one notebook, the one dated between 1906 to 1907, Rosicrucian as a term appears more than 50 times. 1906 would have been just about the time where the five disbanded and she's starting this whole project. So there's some kind of linkage there. December 31st, 1907, she writes in that notebook, I confess that I am in the service of a Rosenkreutzer. And another passage, I have been sent to work for the Rosicrucian world of ideas. So what's going on here? That we can acknowledge also that her work and her own personal view of it is very esoterically aligned. So one passage she writes, what is occurring in the material world is the same that occurs in heaven, only with the difference that one of them has a firmer form, while the other, on the contrary, is to be regarded as a thought form, or better expressed, the thought in the heaven has been realized within the earthly life. In esoteric circles, we know that as the term as above, so below. Some of her works very much have this kind of innate symbolism to them, as above, so below. If you can say, like, for argument's sake, this is a reflection first in heaven, or the spiritual plane, and then the bottom being the plane of matter. Furthermore, Hilma wore a necklace for her entire life, which was a silver cross with a rose in its center. This is a primary symbol of Rosicrucianism. The first time that Rosicrucians are mentioned in her notebooks is November 1905, a year before starting the paintings for the temple. So, okay, to play devil's advocate, we could run along this theory about her relation to Rosicrucianism for a while. Clearly there's a link. That's a painting of the altar that the five had, that Hilma did. There's a rose in its center. But playing devil's advocate, we could say theosophy was one of her interests, right? She spoke about and they spoke about Rosicrucianism often, and as did Madame Blavatsky, and partially because this idea of Rosicrucians supported the theory that was Madame Blavatsky's theory of a brotherhood of ascended masters who are working toward the advancement of humanity. So did she get, this terminology and this idea planted as a seed in her mind from theosophy? Possibly. But there's more. So I spoke with her grandnephew. The only way we would really know what's going on in Hilma's mind is to read these notebooks, of which there are 26,000 pages. and which are not publicly available. So you have to be an academic researcher doing some kind of paper or thesis or PhD for the Hilma Foundation in Sweden to allow you to view these. So I spoke to somebody who did, which is Johan af Klint, her grandnephew, and he says there's some other things going on here. So he gave me some examples that in 1917 in a notebook she stated she has been sent by the brothers and sisters of the White Cross and that they stand by her side while painting. Okay. So maybe she's not thinking of it as a physical order only. And so according to her grandnephew who I spoke with, he told me that he broke this down. I don't know how he got this information, perhaps again through her notebooks. That the Brothers of the White Cross is a secret alliance with representatives from various religions such as Buddha, Christ, and the Brothers of Ararat. The latter, the Brothers of Ararat, are 30 in number. They are Rosicrucians who are led by the spirit Amaliel. They live in the astral world. The Brothers of Ararat have received acuity and know how to use the power of the light in order to fight back the worldly life. I'm not sure what that means, but fight back the worldly life. The thought that I had today in the car was, what if they can push away their next reincarnation, the worldly life? Like they have enough ability that they can do away with reincarnating. So all these individuals, the Brothers of the White Cross, as well as the Brothers of the Ararat, supported Hilma af Klint in her work. This is something Johan told me. So I Googled the Brothers of Ararat, and they don't have a Facebook page. So it's probably legit. It's probably only on the astral plane. In any case, super fascinating. That only led me into a deeper and deeper rabbit hole. Because then, okay, well, what other evidence is there about the possibility of the Rosicrucian order being an influence on her somewhere, right? So more material from Johan. He did some investigating, and he found that there are 4 Rosicrucian orders in Sweden. 3 of them were established at various years after 1988, so long after Hilma was deceased. But the 4th Rosicrucian order, which is the AMORC, which still exists today, and established in New York originally in 1915, a lodge of the AMORC was established in Copenhagen in 1920 and in Malmö, Sweden in 1933. And Hilma af Klint would live in Lund in the south of Sweden during the winters of 1934 to 1943, which is where the AMORC would have been headquartered close to. And so it's very possible that she would either visit them during those winters in Lund, because it wasn't far away, or just be in communication with them. But that still doesn't prove anything for us, what we're talking about, because she starts talking about them way before. And when she's talking about the Brothers of the Ararat and Brothers of the White Cross standing next to her when she's painting, that's like way before even Rosicrucianism exists in Sweden in any form. So she's just connecting, she's opening some kind of channels on her own. So from the 1930s onwards, is she involved in Rosicrucianism? Pretty likely. She lives near them, near a lodge, an order, during the winters. And so at very least, she's in correspondence with them, but only from the 1930s onward. But from the 1906, when she's doing these paintings, is she belonging to a Rosicrucian order? Yes, but not on the physical plane. So we get to our last question. That's great, mister. What is the spiritual message to humanity encoded in Hilma's paintings? Which in many ways is the whole mission of her work. The problem with figuring this out is that Hilma herself didn't fully know. She was channeling these works. And it's important to point that out, that these paintings, though occasionally they look abstract, she would refer to them as sacred works. And these were not intellectual exercises. To her, she was getting a message that's in a sense encoded with certain knowledge, certain instruction, and again, a spiritual message to humanity. So like you saw in those 800 words that she cataloged, she was trying to figure it out too. So even looking at her notebooks might not give us the full answer, but it gives us some kind of answer. So Johann shared this with me, her grandnephew, that part of Hilma's philosophy of life could be broken down into this passage, that all living beings derive from the primal tone, the keynote of the universe, and have a soul, which by means of reincarnations undergoes a cyclical development of the mind to higher forms of existence where all is one. So that being her philosophy of life. And then as far as anything that we can surmise to be some kind of spiritual message to humanity in the paintings to the temple, this was Johann's phrasing. So there might be one of many messages. He says that the message is that we are about to leave materialism, being Darwin's biology and Newton's and Einstein's physics, in order to move into and accept mentalism, where everything is based on mind. Or as they say in the Buddhist traditions, all is one. And yeah, a lot of food for thought. So that is where we finish. And I want to just say that, why is Hilma important to us today? Why is she getting all this attention? And why should she be getting all this attention? I think she serves, for anybody that looks at her work, looks at her life, as an antidote to cynicism and nihilism. She reminds us that we all have some kind of spiritual core, and that there's incredibly valuable things in there, and that we're not just on the material plane alone, and that it's worth taking a moment to explore that, and the value also of getting together with others in even small groups and exploring that. And it kind of accelerates that growth exponentially. And you could see after 10 years, then she was able to do those works. I think without being in the five for those 10 years, I don't think she would have done that. And that's where I'll land my plane. So, if you're interested, I have a series going on about her right now on my podcast, Creative Codex. You can follow me on Instagram. And otherwise, thank you for coming, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you guys might have.
If you have any questions, please raise your hand. I'll come to you. Don't start speaking until the microphone is in front of you, and please resist the temptation to grab the microphone. I'll hold it for you.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Michael, first of all. Make me feel like a real gentleman. That was an amazing lecture. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
I have, a lot of questions. I'm going to just ask one right now. When you say that she's a creative genius, or that you study creative geniuses, when you say the word genius, are you meaning it in the Latin sense, where it's someone who's inhabited by something divine or supernatural, versus, I don't know, maybe someone who's, this is like a kind of a straw man example. Michael Phelps, right? He's a great swimmer, but he was also born with like 14 different double joints that gives him that natural edge. So for you, when you are studying her as a creative genius, is it more like, oh, she had a capacity output of all this stuff, but it was also quality? Or where do you kind of divide and kind of reach your definition of what?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a fun question. I mean, I would say that when someone achieves the level of, artistry and ability in their craft that Hilma does, they end up fulfilling both aspects of that question. They're a creative genius in the sense of that the way they're using their creativity and manifesting works into the world is just like so above and beyond what, let's say, the average would be. And also that those works are significant, they're consequential, they're innovative, and they're part of a larger creative vision. And so you see, she made 1,500 artworks. Those first 193, that are part of paintings for the temple are the ones that are the most discussed. But her vision is vast. So she's a creative genius in that regard. But I think there's definitely something to be said, and I think we should revive also this idea of genius in the traditional Roman sense, and then earlier in the Greek sense of daimon, that when you're engaging with creativity and I guess opening these kinds of channels, you are creating works that aren't necessarily your own, that something else is happening. And I think a lot of artists, a lot of creatives would agree that there are days when they make something and they're like, I don't recognize this isn't me. So there's something there.
You could also assume that they are one and the same too, because someone of subpar, excellence is not going to be able to channel some of these higher beings as well too. So there's an attunement of a meeting place between those, at least in the classical sense. I'm trying to go according to the order of the hands I saw raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to make an observation and a question. I wondered if the letters, because they weren't kind of like made up letters, they seemed to be letters that we know, and I wondered if they might have been sounds, almost reminded me of like Om would be used in this kind of, and because tones and sounds were mentioned in that second to last. So that's that made me think of that. And also I was curious because of the drawings, and I don't have a science background, but I wondered if any like physicists or astrophysicists and somebody like David Clements has looked at these images, or because I feel like somebody who has more science background might understand something about them.
Yeah, both of those very interesting points. The idea of the sounds, that's super neat. I mean, that's something that one would again need to sift through all those thousands of pages of notebooks to find if they have mentioned anything about hearing something in those visions.
There's a lot of talk. I mean, I absorb a lot of spiritual stuff, but I know there's a lot of talk, and I'm very interested in sort of health and the mind-body connection, but there's a lot of talk about, sound therapy is getting big now, and light therapy and color,
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. That'll be a great field of study to overlap with some scholarly work with Hilma. And then the other thing you said about, if anybody from the scientists has looked at her stuff, and clearly, and we know this actually, she was very well read in science and biology, and she had an interest in that. Probably specific, like because it overlapped with these kinds of spiritual and artistic inclinations she had. But yeah, I totally agree. Like if somebody who was a biologist looked at this stuff, maybe they'd be like, oh yeah, no, that's so and so. Oh right, of course. How did she know that existed? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you for taking time tonight to share this. I'm embarrassed to say that up until this lecture, I didn't even know who this was. The work is astounding. Her backstory is fascinating. She's a beautiful woman. The artwork is beautiful. I love the quotes. I love the very first quote you shared where she talked about how she acknowledges that she's insignificant, and yet there's something inside of her so powerful that pushes her forward. That's mind-blowing. Going back to like the artwork and the correspondence between letters and meaning, I'm reminded of the fact that all alphabets in the human race are based off symbols. So therefore, like the original language of all humans is symbols. And I'm wondering, you mentioned there's this series, for the temple, and then you also show some of the work that she did that was more sort of nature related. Where could one see this work in person? You mentioned there was a showcase at the MoMA recently, or I've never been exposed to this before. I would love to see more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean, she, I'll comment on her very unique place in the art world today. After this initial comment, I guess, in terms of where you can see it, it travels the world in various points in times. I think there might be an exhibit in Japan right now. You can look it up on the Hilma af Klint Foundation website. They keep track of where the work is. And the one that was in the MoMA was specifically for her illustrations and watercolors dealing with flowers and plants. It was very appropriate for the springtime when the show came out. It was wonderful. Good timing, good curation. But in terms of this other unique position that she now has in the art world, part of the way that the af Klint family, specifically Johann and his father, the way they bequeathed the work to the Hilma af Klint Foundation, they specified that the works should never be separated. They need to stay together, and when they're viewed as a series. And so they can't be sold either. Because you could imagine, I mean, millionaires, billionaires would love this kind of stuff. They just throw money at it, and they take one, and then they hide it in their palazzo for years, and we never see it again. So those are very specific stipulations, but thereby she has a very strange and unique, was strange and unique all her life, and she continues to be after in her next life now, that the works are kept together, they can't be sold, but they're exhibited all around the world constantly.
Over here. So out of the 1,500 artworks, to get the chronology right, are you focusing solely on the journals and the dates that are put on every artwork? Do you believe that all of the dates were put on at either the time of beginning the artwork at the end? And for the ones that fall under the same year, how do you sort those? And just follow-up question to somebody who studies it, do you think any of them are out of sequence when you're looking at the entire set chronologically?
So because she had this creative vision that was very much dictated to her by the spirits that she was channeling, the spirits gave her very specific instructions. Oftentimes those instructions involved the dimensions of the painting. And so she would write that down. So when she made the 10 largest that we were looking at the beginning there, that are 10 feet tall by 7 feet wide, I mean, the bravado, the daring it takes for somebody, especially early 1900s, this is before the term abstract art existed. The gall it takes for somebody to say, yeah, I'm gonna, these enormous 10 feet tall abstract, there's no word for it, first of all, but these paintings that nobody will understand for a lifetime. So part of what happens is that she received that instruction from these sessions, from these specific various spirits that we mentioned, those 5. And she noted all that down. And because she was very good at keeping those notes, because she knew eventually, as history progressed, people would look back and gain some kind of benefit from it, we can see basically a catalog, a chronological order of the works, because she's writing it all down. That's part of why the notebooks are so long. She's writing everything down.
Yeah, and not that those aren't great source materials, but was there ever an option or possibility to carbon date to get specific dates, just to put for yourself in a different chronology for something that maybe happened in the same year?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that research. That's why we need more scholars of Hilma's work right now. It's for all that kind of work, just to really flesh out all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's an exciting field for anybody who's an art major right now. A lot of people are like, oh, there's a lot of work to do here. This is exciting stuff. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Milosz, as I'm coming around for the next question, I have a question. Did anyone use these as yantras where they were able to meditate on them, and then in a particular sequence have had a specific psychological effect that they could relay? Has that ever happened to you or anybody else that that's recorded?
It's a great question. I know that when the paintings were in the Guggenheim, there was space given. Was it Guggenheim or the Moderna Museet in Sweden? One of those two. There was space given for meditation classes to come in, and they would basically sit in front of them as if they were mandalas to meditate on. So surrounded by those works, that would be definitely something to ask those folks. What do they feel? What do they see?
Interesting to know.
Yeah, you actually sort of prefigured my question a little bit. Originally, you had a quote from Hilma af Klint saying that she saw something about being recognized in a spiral temple.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you know about the layout of the Guggenheim Museum, but the first place she was exhibited in the United States was there. So
yes.
sort of is the spiral temple. in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but,
It's
also, just a quick note, like she prefigured a lot of the techniques that many other artists like Kandinsky and Joe Marot and so forth by 20 years or
Right.
something like that. So
yeah. But what's so important to remember about it, and again, what she I think teaches us in the 21st century, is that these are not intellectual exercises. What ends up happening in the 20th century, or good or bad, it had to happen. Art starts to get very conceptual. People intellectualize everything, and the concept becomes the piece of art. And it doesn't have much more heart than that to it. But what's happening with Hilma is she doesn't understand these works herself because they come to her from visionary states. And so thereby there's a certain kind of depth to them that I think we innately feel when we're standing in front of one or even gazing at these for long enough.
They have an effect.
Yeah, and you can't really describe what it is, but you feel something. And I think you feel something more than just an intellectual exercise, which it wasn't.
It works pretty good. You can stay there.
I can just talk. It's kind of exists in a vacuum, it seems, with this. What did you learn about where she painted? Did she paint in a farmhouse? Did she paint in downtown Stockholm? I mean, were there people who came by and saw the work? Were there people who talked about it? I mean, what was the context in terms of the ideas were shared or not shared?
Yeah, no, great point. So what ends up happening is after the five disband, Hilma takes on this role, of basically ushering these works into the world. That's her responsibility. And even as quickly as within those first few months in 1906, she already has this circle of women that number about 12 women that within the year they're just hanging out in her studio, and they would pray together, and they would sometimes just be present in the room as she's painting these works. And then other times, like with the 10 largest, they actually help her because the works are so enormous that they are there to lay things out. She'll choose what color is supposed to go here, and they'll paint a certain section. Predominantly, she's still doing all the work, but it became almost like a little workshop for a time. And around that time, Johann told me, in the notebooks, it shows that the spirits actually, now she's already in her mid 40s, because she's 44 when she starts this incredible venture of the paintings for the temple, which on its own is admirable, to innovate something like that and be bold enough that way. So the spirits at one point request or imply that she should basically found her own semi-religious movement similar to Theosophy, and that she already has these what would be 12 disciples around her, and that she would lead it. But she didn't like that idea. So occasionally she would push back on their suggestions and these messages that came through. So hopefully that colors the picture a little more.
Fascinating stuff, Milosz. So
Thanks.
just maybe a little bit cross question, but I just want to know, how did she earn the living? Because just to understand the motivation of not selling this, as you said, like wealthy would pay the fortune for this. So why wouldn't she sell the painting, and how did she, support herself?
Well, at the time, nobody would buy these. Early 1900s, she attempted showing them to a few people to test the waters. No one understood what this was. People thought this was like, what kind of, like, in its worst form, they would say, it's probably garbage. Like, what are you thinking you're doing? Only classical paintings are acceptable, in the world. And so she wouldn't be able to make a living that way. She was fortunate enough, again, to have this, the history of her family being a successful military family. So she had some finances that way to fall back on, to give her, the allowance to pursue these kinds of things. Occasionally she would be strapped for cash later in life. She had very helpful friends that would help her in that regard. And she was still painting in regular traditional forms, representational forms, that would show in galleries, and occasionally, get a commission from those as well. So she was leading this double life where she was creating these kinds of works and then also in public creating regular works.
And why the delay though? Why the delay of 20 years? Like specifically 20 years or just...
Why 20 years?
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure, but again, it's one of these details conveyed to her by the spirits. One of the spirits said, like, okay, this isn't your time, 20 years.
I was going to ask the same.
So I saw this show at the Guggenheim. I had to look it up. I thought it was longer ago, but it was 2018.
2019, yeah.
Right, to 2019. And it was shown in a spiral, and they are enormous, and it is really intense. Like to go from the bottom all the way up to the top, or vice versa. It was like a really intense show. And I had not heard of her. I was an art minor, and I follow art, like all my life. And I had not heard of her until the New York Times did a story about that show. And she wasn't part of any movement at the time. And the forms that we see were not, she was 40, 50 years ahead of her time in terms of like pure abstraction. But to her, this wasn't abstract. These were literally ideas that were being communicated to her. And I think that she wanted to push it into the future because she thought that by now we would understand when we saw them, and we don't. But it's still really wonderful.
Right. No,
one more thing. I think at least one of her paintings, she shows helixes before we understand that as a scientific concept, like about 30 years before. It was. I think that was something that they pointed out.
It's very possible. Yeah. I think I know which one you're talking about. Yeah. No, all great points. Someone mentioned to me recently, and I love this point as well. I think it dovetails on yours, that to her these are representational works, because as you saw with the sketches of the five, that's what they were seeing, and so in a sense they're seeing something not part of physical reality, and it's what we can sense with our senses, but you can say either subjective experience of your inner reality, or the next one up, spiritual reality.
Is that the full painting, or is there a top and it's perfectly circular? Is that cut off, or is
it cuts off that way? Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point as well. It's a little bit evocative of Johann Itten and the Bauhaus. I know that they were a little bit later, but they were into theosophy, weren't they? And they were doing like movement on the roof of the Bauhaus, and Klee and Itten and all those guys were really investigating color and kind of. Those circular paintings are a little bit like Delaunay. That's a bit later, but they're more obviously abstract. But
it prefigures a lot of that stuff. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, even Kandinsky, who's credited as like the first before Hilma came on the scene. Kandinsky tried to take the blue ribbon of the first abstract work. But he was very spiritually motivated in his work as well. That's what I think is very interesting about the 20th century progression of the arts, is that abstraction actually starts from spiritual motivations. And in a sense, when you're experiencing visionary states that seem to have nothing to do with physical reality, it leads you into abstraction because you have no other way of communicating it, because it doesn't associate with physical reality, right? So it's interesting.
He also taught at the Bauhaus, didn't he, Kandinsky?
Perhaps, yeah.
I think so. At the same time, Itten, Kandinsky, Klee, they were all friends.
Cool, yeah. Good point.
Milosz, what was the quote at the end where she used the word tone?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, right? Something that actually brings the idea of vibrations to mind. The idea of the ketone. It's many, many, many slides. So all living being is derived from the primal tone, the keynote of the universe, and have a soul, which by means of reincarnations undergoes a cyclical development of the mind to higher forms of existence where all is one.
Maybe the point to her, the effect of her artwork, is not to be understood, as you say, we keep on repeating for this whole thing intellectually, but the whole point of meditation, or at least contemplative meditation, is to release the clenching mind that tries to understand it in terms of concepts and language, and to release that and to just accept it and feel it and be it. I mean, after all, she's talking about tone, and the real meaning of the word universe is one song, universe.
Good points. Good points. Yeah, bringing it back to vibration too. I mean, colors are vibrations also, which is interesting to reflect on.
Any other questions? Let's give Milosz a hand. Thank you.